Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 17 of the Presidential Election Show. And it's a great pleasure to be back. I'm your host, Mark Watts. And it's always a pleasure, of course, to welcome Ryan Hunter, who's the in-house politics expert at LP Brussels. Welcome, Ryan, and how have you been?
Hi, Mark. Thank you for having me back. Well, it's been busy over the holiday period, and a lot's happened during our hiatus.
Indeed, we've got a lot of ground to cover today. Dramatic events, of course, over the last few weeks, but particularly, of course, the last 24 hours, last 48 hours, the riot in the capital, of course. What is the political fallout from all that, Ryan? What does it actually mean for the politics in America?
Well, as you can imagine, it's just added more fuel to a fire that's already been going quite crazily, of course, because since the election, many of the people that we saw storming Congress have been incited and hyped up by the president himself and by other Republicans like Ted Cruz and Senator Hawley. And what we saw yesterday was not 2 days ago, was not a protest that suddenly got out of hand. It was something planned. People who came to the protests and then went to the Capitol Hill were prepared for far more than a peaceful protest. Some were even carrying with them plastic handcuffs, so God knows what they were expecting to happen. But it's a situation that was a catastrophic security failure and really could have been a lot worse than it was. Now, 4 or 5 people did die, which was very sad to see. But I think this is a situation that really could have gotten much more out of hand than it did. Now, fallout has been interesting because you had a debate centering on 2 choices now, really, is Democrats saying to the cabinet, you have to pursue the 25th Amendment to remove Trump from office and put Mike Pence in office. That failing, Congress should pursue impeachment once again. And so that's really been what the debate's been centering on in the last 2 days. Now, one of those things I think will happen. And Democrats are determined that impeachment will happen if the cabinet doesn't take its responsibility to invoke the 25th Amendment.
Well, thank you for that roundup, Ryan. Obviously, very fast-moving events, very dramatic events. But maybe just a personal thought on where you think this leaves Trump and his legacy now. I mean, I think a lot of us were shocked, obviously, by the event, but also the really strident reaction from Pence and many other senior Republicans to distance themselves from what they saw was incitement by their own leader, by their own president. I mean, it's a pretty seismic political earthquake going on in the Republican Party here. Do you want to perhaps comment on that, Ryan, if you are still with us? One of the challenges of a live broadcast is the inevitable glitches in terms of the internet.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. You're back with us, Ryan. Welcome back to the show. Sorry about the glitches there. Just saying, where does this leave Trump's legacy? And are we not now seeing a major cleavage opening up between the Republicans, but including senior former Trump supporters like Mike Pence and Mitch McConnell and many others, and what's left of the Trump rump?
Well, it's you have Republicans who are now coming out, of course, saying how appalled they are at what happened, and how shocked they are at the images they saw. And quite frankly, I don't know why they're surprised, because this has been in the making for months. Even during the election campaign, everything was being set up for this very outcome. And you know that Republicans, not all of them were out there hyping up these supporters, but a lot of them were enabling this to happen. And so where this leaves the Trump legacy is very, very much it's a good question, because when Trump first came in, the question was he going to fundamentally change government institutions? Was he going to leave his mark on the Congress, on the presidency itself. And throughout his presidency, we've seen the institutions were bended, and they were breached both figuratively and quite literally 2 days ago. But after Congress certified the Joe Biden victory, you have to say that the institutions haven't been broken. And so his legacy in that regard, I don't know if it's as strong or as concrete as many of his supporters would have hoped. The swamp was not drained. And in fact, I think what happened 2 days ago will overshadow anything else he's been doing.
Okay, well, one to watch out for, the Trump legacy. Obviously, a very fast-moving situation, as we've discussed, and we'll come back to that in the next week or two when we have the next show. Ryan, if we can move on to the Democrats now. Of course, what was also overshadowed was the amazing victory by the Democrats in those two Georgia runoff seats, clinching those seats, but of course, most important of all, gaining control of the Senate and therefore effectively, and you'll explain, but taking control of Capitol Hill, essentially, because they have a majority now in the House and the Senate. What difference do you think all that makes for the incoming Biden administration?
All the world. It's huge, because as we've discussed on this show before, the Senate is the vehicle for your agenda, right? But it can also prevent what you want. And with the Republicans controlling the Senate, recently we've seen how much the Senate majority leader can block whatever comes from the House and can block a lot of an agenda. With Joe Biden and the Democrats now controlling all three branches of government, with in the Senate having the slimmest of slim majorities for sure, but it really changes everything, because you're going to have Chuck Schumer becoming the Senate majority leader. Bills that you want on the floor will go to the floor, whether they get voted or not. That's a different question, but at least they will be heard. You're going to have much more synergy between the branches of government, and everything changes, right? The Democrats were not supposed to win both seats. Maybe one was a good outcome, but two is fantastic for them, because now even Joe Biden's cabinet picks will pass much more easily. So if you're Joe Biden, you're really happy, very surprised, but really happy with how it turned out. Now, having a majority doesn't guarantee things to happen. Joe Biden has always wanted bipartisan support on his big initiatives, but there's a big difference between needing Republican votes and wanting them. And that is a big difference for the Democrats, and that's going to make Joe Biden's life a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah. And I can't resist remarking on the fact that I guess the Republican defeat in Georgia to some extent is being put down to the rather eccentric behavior by Trump in recent weeks. And I guess Republicans are working that out, that maybe he's no longer the election winner that he may have been in the past, and therefore perhaps distancing themselves from him in the coming period. We're going to see more and more of that happening. I mean, if they can lose in Georgia, they can almost lose anywhere.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're seeing both sides of what Trump can bring, right? He can monopolize coverage for better or for worse. And in this case, it was for worse, because that phone call where he tried to persuade the Georgia Secretary of State to find votes to overturn a result suddenly dominated the last few days of the campaign. Now, whether that changed people's votes, who's to say? But suddenly, every question being received by the Republican candidates and the Democratic candidates were identical. And that was, what do you think about what Trump did? And it completely destroyed the arguments the Republicans were making about, put us in the Senate or keep us there will be a check on the socialist Democratic agenda. Suddenly, the conversation shifted towards Trump, and that really, I think, impacted their messaging.
Thanks for that, Ryan. Well, we're episode 17 of this show. It's been a long journey, you and I, and our special guests, of course, and particularly, of course, Michael Meehan. We've covered a hell of a lot of ground. And one of the things we've prided ourselves on in what I think now is, let's be honest, this is an iconic show we're on, Ryan. is that we do a deep dive into the issues, particularly what Biden is going to do once he gets into the White House. We've done a lot of speculation on that, and I know you've been doing a lot of research on that more recently. So what are we expecting here from the Biden administration? Do you want to go through what you think his priorities will be?
Yeah. Well, in the U.S., we often talk about the first 100 days, and the first 100 days are where an administration will make its mark. Now, maybe not in legislation, but also in messaging. I think the top priority, and it's not even close, is to get control of the COVID pandemic. If you can't do that, you can't do anything else on your agenda, because that also implies taking back control of the economy, which has been really severely impacted by COVID. And once you get past that, you can start to look at other top items like immigration reform, which is a big one for the Biden administration. You also have potential push on gun control. But for me, the next top item will be climate change. And first and foremost will be rejoining the Paris Agreement as a big symbol for that renewed fight. And then you're talking about raising the importance of climate change across the board in government, in all legislation, like we've seen in Europe in the European Green Deal, just making it more horizontal. And then we're going to see the US regain the lead internationally on climate change as well. So top priority, clearly COVID. Once you can get control of that, you can look a bit more broadly into climate change, immigration reform, and the like. But for the time being, it's going to be just COVID.
Yeah, sure. And I'm sure even just trying to address the COVID crisis, given the scale of that crisis in America, it's bad enough in much of Europe, but in America, it's a different level of crisis, I guess. And that's going to be something that's going to take a lot of his time and bandwidth to focus on. The other thing we've been particularly keen to address is what Biden means for Europe, and what he doesn't mean for Europe. We've already touched on climate change and re-signing the Paris Accord, and we're likely to see a lot of synergy between the EU and the US once more on climate. But I know before you've also cautioned us, Ryan, that we shouldn't just believe that this is a return to the old days of the Obama administration type of relationship. So what are you looking out for here in terms of the clues to how member states, Angela Merkel or Macron in France or VDL in the European Union, what will be their agenda? What will be the transatlantic agenda?
That's a very important question for everyone in Europe right now. Firstly, I would caution that even a return to the Obama era, that wasn't the rosiest of partnerships, bearing in mind that the US had their famous pivot to Asia during his presidency, and also the failed TTIP negotiations. I think the outlook is, in the immediacy, it's going to be looking at what's possible. Where can they agree? Because there are a lot of topics that will cause friction. Trade, subsidies, as we've seen in the Boeing and Airbus case at the World Trade Organization. That is a point of friction for sure. That will never change regardless of who's in power in the US. And so then you start to look at, okay, what's possible? Where can we cooperate? And we keep talking about it, but it's going to be climate change. That is where the Democratic Party has really moved, and it's moved very closely to what we're seeing in the EU. We saw the European Commission come out in December with a document, call it a white paper on a future US-EU partnership, and they list things that you will find in any European Commission text, as well as the Joe Biden plan. That is emissions trading, carbon pricing and taxation, even a possible carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is a big one in Europe. So you have real big points of cooperation in that area. I can't say for certain if that will be the case. We'll know more in the first few months of the year. The Commission wants to have a joint summit, virtual summit now, between the US and the EU that will formalize that cooperation. And I think we'll see that bearing fruit by the time we get around to COP26 in November in the UK, where this partnership on climate will become very evident indeed.
Well, a lot of that focused around climate, as you say. And if we now maybe look at the rest of the world, Ryan, what do you think Biden's priorities will be there? Obviously, climate, top of the agenda after tackling COVID, and maybe trying to move some way to rebuilding European relationships, partly to tackle climate as well. But to the rest of the world, what will Biden mean for China, for Russia, for the Middle East?
Well, stability, I think, would be the first word that comes to mind. The issue for Joe Biden is that a lot of this is out of his control now. He doesn't come onto a clean slate, if you will, right? A lot's happened in 4 years that ties his hands behind his back. Effectively, the relationship with Russia and China is potentially beyond repair at this stage. Joe Biden will enter into a very tense relationship with China, as well as with Russia. And what he's been saying on the campaign trail doesn't lead me to believe that he will reverse course. The stance, even among the Democratic Party towards China and Russia, is still quite negative, as it is in the Republican Party. So with those two big partnerships, I don't see much change happening. You can see a Biden administration trying to revive the Iran nuclear deal. That would be great news for the world, although it is possible Iran has just moved on from that. You're looking at maybe getting India to tackle climate change to a higher degree than it has been doing. That would be a big win for him. And then you're looking at trade, right? Maybe reviving the TPP partnership, which has been taken over by the Chinese-led RCEP trade deal. That would be another one, an Obama item that Biden might revive. So there's a lot of things that can happen on foreign policy. And as we've said, the president has more authority to go by himself or herself to deal with foreign policy. The domestic agenda is more constrained by Congress. So I think we'll see a few symbolic things happening on foreign policy early on. But in terms of concrete items, I think the Biden focus will be domestic first, foreign second.
Okay, thank you for that, Ryan. Well, before we wrap up for today's show, maybe give us some highlights of what you think the key dates now, the key milestones will be in the coming days and weeks. We're into some extent, I guess, uncharted territory because of the attempts to perhaps impeach the president ahead of the inauguration of President-elect Biden. But you just want to talk us through now, what are the key dates, the key events that are going to dominate the U.S. presidential agenda in the build-up to the 20th of January?
Yes. Well, yeah, as you've mentioned, the impeachment proceedings put things a bit up in the air. On that, I think we can expect some movement next week in the House as regards an impeachment procedure. So that I'll leave that aside for now and look a bit further forward. But you have the January 20th inauguration of Joe Biden. That is the biggest date ahead of us. You have, of course, possibility of more protests, as we saw. There's a big movement for a January 19th second act, if you would like to call it that way, of what we saw 2 days ago. So that will be something to watch. So then beyond the inauguration, just the first 100 days, as it's not one date, so I'm cheating a bit there. It's 100 days, but the first 100 days where the Biden administration will get its messaging across, change of tone, more reconciliatory, and all that. But things will move fast in the Biden administration. There's a lot to do and very little time to do it, because a date that's much further down the line will be the midterm elections. And between now and then, you have 3 branches of government under Democratic control. You can get a lot done, but there comes a point when people start campaigning again for those midterm elections, and you might lose the attention that you have when you first begin. Even Raphael Warnock from Georgia will have to run again in the midterm elections, for example. So the Democrats have a risk of losing the Senate majority that they've just gained. I don't think they will, but that's a risk. So The big dates will be the ones I've just mentioned. So the inauguration, the midterm elections, and then the first 100 days. Everyone needs to keep an eye on those, and as they will be defining moments for the Biden presidency.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Ryan. Looks like we've got a lot to talk about on the next episode, which of course will be episode 18 of the US presidential election show. Hopefully you'll be able to join us, Ryan, and share with us your insight and analysis of what it's looking like ahead of the inauguration. As we said earlier, it's been a hell of a long journey, a lot of hurdles to overcome, but it does look like now that Biden will be inaugurated on the 20th of January. But I think you're warning us here that there could be more protests on the 19th. But Biden has nonetheless well prepared a very ambitious agenda for that first 100 days. So,
and certainly his speech on Inauguration Day is one other major event to keep an eye on. That was the infamous America First speech that Donald Trump gave his inauguration. So, right. And look how long that message lasted for. So keep an eye out for that speech by Joe Biden to set the messaging and the tone for his presidency.
Sounds like you've got a few more late nights ahead of you in the coming days and weeks, Ryan, to be able to give us some of this transatlantic insight that you've so generously shared with us over the last few weeks and months. If we could just remind our viewers that they can, of course, like this show, they can share, they can comment, tell us what you think. You can subscribe to the channel, and of course, ring that all-important notification bell. We will be back very, very soon. And this is an opportunity, obviously, to wish everyone a happy new year. And we look forward to hearing what you have to say about the US election and continuing with episode 19 in, I'm sure, in just a few days' time. So thank you for watching, and look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. Goodbye.
Goodbye.